Hey guys, it's Sam, and this is my spoiler-free review of Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is the third book in the Red Rising trilogy. Well, it was originally a trilogy, and now I believe it's a continuing series, but this was the finale of the original trilogy of this series. I've done a review of the first two books, so I'll link those on the screen if you haven't read those books yet. So first off, before I get into this, I listened to this book on audio, and that was not a good decision for this book because I ended up not enjoying it as much as I think I would have enjoyed it if I was just reading it on physical copy. I've enjoyed the rest of the books in this series immensely. They're a lot of fun. They're books that I read very quickly. This audiobook took me over a month. It was about a month and a half of reading this audiobook, and I was not motivated to pick it up. I was constantly listening to other things like podcasts or music instead of listening to the audiobook, which doesn't happen when I'm engaged with the story, and it just wasn't a very fun time for me. I don't know what it was because I enjoyed the narrator and I really liked the voices that he used for people, and I liked the dialogue scenes and the non-action scenes, but there's a lot of action scenes in this book, and I always glazed over during like every action scene, which is not good for a book like this. It's pretty intense and has a lot of action. So I would have, if I could go back, I would have just read it on physical copy, but I used an Audible credit on it, so at that point I had spent money and I didn't want to go back and just read it on physical copy, and I was trying to get more books read and all this stuff. But I just want to preface this whole review with saying that I read the audiobook and that personally wasn't the right format for this book for me. So first off, I'm going to talk about the world building. At this point, we're in book 3 and I fully grasp all of the world building, and that's really fun because you're just so used to it at this point. I have pictures of all of the people in my head, how their politics work, how the ships look, how the people look, because everyone has a different look in this series as well, and their weapons and everything like that. So at this point in the series, I was fully immersed in the world. We weren't getting too much extra world building. You do go to a couple new places and see people that you aren't used to from before, but that you have some knowledge of. So that was fun, but at this point, it's just a world that I'm familiar with and I really like being in. Next, let me talk about our characters. Our main character of Darrow remains one of my favorites. At this point in time, he's going through some PTSD symptoms, and I appreciate when these kinds of dystopian novels actually show the characters going through this kind of trauma, because I feel like sometimes books just ignore the fact that these things would be really traumatic for people, and Darrow's been through a lot in his young life, because at this point I think he's like mid-20s, and so having a character that's actually having some like PTSD is just a nice thing to see, and I just really like Darrow. He's a character I always pull for. I like his friend group. I just like that he's flawed and complex and makes a lot of mistakes, but also recognizes those mistakes. Like, he's just a character that is continuously evolving, and I really enjoy him. But I have the same complaint that I've always had throughout the series, and that some people told me got better, and I disagree with. I do not like the way that the female characters are handled in this series. There's a lot of female characters I really like. Victra and Mustang are two of my favorite. Also, one of the Obsidians, and I'm forgetting what her name is right now. But I really like all of these characters. I think that they're really well, like, fleshed out, and they have really distinct personalities, but the female characters are always talked about and sort of referenced in relationship to their relationships with their male characters. They are constantly framed in relation to the male characters. They are the male characters' love interests, or mothers, or usually deceased someones, or whatever. And it's just like, they're always framed as that. They're constantly used as motivation for the male characters, and they just don't quite have as much agency as I'd like them to. Some of them have more than others, but like ultimately throughout this whole series, the female characters are used as motivators for the male characters, and you don't really get to feel their perspective. I know it's in Darrow's POV, but it still isn't, like, you can have the other characters feel like they have some kind of agency, and I feel like the male characters are very much fleshed out and have their own agency, and the female characters are constantly framed as motivation. The wife of Darrow, who you learn about in the very first book, she is constantly brought up as this motivator for the things that he does. Slowly but surely, his new love interest takes her place as, like, she's still mentioned, but this new love interest is also this new motivator, and it's just tiresome. Like, I want the female characters to have more to them than just being these, like, reference points for the male characters. This book is also very heavily about the bromances and the male friendship, which I love. It's a pro and a con, because I do love how strong these bonds are. They're like blood brothers, and all of these characters that he has and that Darrow has loved over time, and he says that he loves, but at the same time it's like very male relationship focus at the same time again. Like, I don't feel like he has, with the exception of one, he doesn't really have, like, the same closeness of female friends. He just has all these, like, male friends, and then the female friends he does have also end up dating some of his male friends. So it's just, like, again, the women are always in relation to, like, the men, and it's just, I don't like it. I don't love it. But I still really love these characters. I still really love, like, the friend group and the, like, little found family that they have. You guys know how I feel about that. Lastly, we talk about the plot. I still find this plot incredibly unpredictable, and again, I wish I was reading it in physical copy because I would have flown through this book, because this series stresses me out and I can never put it down because things are constantly being turned in their head. I can never predict what's happening, and I really enjoy that. The one thing that I do have kind of a gripe about that I've noticed, I think he did in one of the earlier books as well, you're in Darrow's POV, but sometimes you'll have things happen that'll be a twist, but you're like, if that's something that he was clued in on. So it's like a thing that if he like stabs someone in the back or something, but you're in his head and he's thinking as if he doesn't know what's going on, but then he's like, gotcha, and he does. That doesn't work when you have like a first person kind of perspective, or where you're following the one character and you're supposed to be in their head. That doesn't make any sense. So I feel like that's been used a few times now, and I'm like, cool twist. I'm really excited because I like how that went, but also, like, if I'm in his head, it shouldn't have happened like that. Small complaint. Something that it's, again, kind of a two-sided thing. I also feel like this finale really went there with the loss and everything, so I complain a lot about finales not quite going there and not quite being willing to, like, kill their darlings or whatever the case may be. This series has been brutal from the beginning, so I kind of knew that it wouldn't be disappointing in that way, and it definitely wasn't. It was just enough. It didn't feel gratuitous, but it also felt like this is a war zone. Things are going to happen to some of the characters, and that is what happened, and that's something that I liked and found very fulfilling about the story. So overall, I enjoyed this, but didn't enjoy it as much as I could have. I like a lot of the plot things, but I would have enjoyed it better in physical copy. I ultimately gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think if I would have read it in physical copy, it might have been like a 4 or a 4.5, but what can you do? So ultimately, I still plan on continuing with the series now that there's more to the series and more to the world and stuff, but I will be reading these books on physical copy from now on. So I'm not going to be doing a discussion video on this book because this is the last book in sort of the trilogy, but like not because it's continuing. I don't really feel like I would have a ton to say, and also, since I read it over such a long period of time, my brain's a little bit fuzzy on some of the details, so because of just the nature of me reading this in the wrong kind of format for this story, I feel like a discussion wouldn't be great. But I do think that if I read Iron Gold anytime soon, I will do a discussion probably for that and for the books moving forward. So comment down below, let me know what you thought of Morningstar. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.